Welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be doing a question and answer segment on some of our first couple of live streams. Some of the questions that are being asked, and I'm going to take both of these questions together, are what can be done to slow or reverse the decline of the United States? Are there any unique contributing factors to the decline of the United States that have not been seen in previous empires? And the reason I'm taking these two together is because I think the major thing that could have stopped the decline of the United States would have been making sure that money, the financial system, was not used as a weapon in place of military or political means of achieving what the United States wants. And so the fact that the United States has been willing to use the US dollar to punish its enemies and to get countries to fall in line has significantly weakened the United States. The United States really needed countries to buy into the US dollar as a global reserve currency. And so not having faith in that currency is a huge detriment. The United States has punished countries like Afghanistan, Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, etc., etc. And you can really break this down to two parts. One is, are they using the US dollar, the global trade and reserve currency, as a weapon against their enemies? And the answer is yes. The second thing that might make people turn away from the US dollar is, are they using it as a weapon and it's successful? Well, for the longest time, with places like Venezuela, Afghanistan, Iran, Cuba, etc., using the US dollar as a weapon has been highly, highly, highly successful. However, when they used the US dollar as a weapon against Russia, Russia had taken the years between 2014 and when the war started with Ukraine, they took that time to make sure that they were resistant to economic sanctions and to the weaponization of the US dollar. And so the fact that the United States used the US dollar, the global reserve and trade currency, as a weapon is one thing that causes doubt in the US dollar as a global reserve and trade currency. Because remember, people don't want to trade and they don't want to keep on hand US dollars if they could lose access to using those US dollars, as well as even maintaining them. Places like Russia have had their US dollar reserves in other countries in the West frozen, and now they're even trying to take away those US dollar reserves. And so other countries have to worry about, is the United States going to do it? And then if they are going to do it, what is their track record of being successful at hurting that nation? And up until Russia, the United States has been very successful. They've hurt every nation that they've wielded the dollar against. And so countries, while they don't like that the United States is using the US dollar against them, continue to trade in dollars because they felt like they didn't have an option. They felt like if the United States uses the US dollar against them, then it's just over for them. Well, Russia showed them otherwise. Russia had very few problems and actually benefited quite a bit from decoupling from trade with the West, and economic sanctions actually backfired to a very large extent and hurt the West far more than it hurt Russia. And so something new happened with the Russian sanctions. They withstood them, and so suddenly this illegitimate tool, using the global reserve and trade currency against other nations, it was illegitimate, but at this point it was largely successful in using those illegitimate means. But with Russia, that changed. And so I would say that that was the end point. That was the point where you could not really slow or reverse the decline of the United States. Once the United States loses that global reserve and trade status, there is not much they can do to stay in power. The United States doesn't really make enough anymore. And they don't manufacture enough. They don't have enough goods and services that are of value to the rest of the world. All they really have is their dollar. And because countries have not only realized that the United States will weaponize it, as they've been doing for decades, but that a country could successfully resist the weaponization of the US dollar, that means that the decline is irreversible. And so what can be done to slow or reverse the decline of the United States? At this point, nothing. that I would say the real turning point was Russia successfully resisting the economic sanctions, the punishment saying you can't use the US dollars anymore for anything. We're freezing your assets, we're stealing your assets, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the other question here, are there any unique factors contributing to the decline of the United States that have not been seen in previous empires? Well, that is that weaponization of paper money that is not backed up by really anything. We talked a little bit about it being backed up by military force, but I mean, the United States is losing its competitive edge in terms of the military. They've been struggling to make hypersonic weapons, et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of the petrodollar, the United States has been backed up by oil. The United States dollar has been backed up by oil, but that is very quickly changing as well. And so the unique factor here is the United States is using that global reserve and trade currency as a weapon, and it's like it doesn't have any substance to it. There's no actual tangible way they can back that up because it is just paper money. And if you make it too inconvenient for people to use that paper money, then they're going to go elsewhere, and there's not going to be anything the United States can do unless they figure out some way to have another competitive advantage aside from that US dollar, which I don't see happening at this point. The United States really is done for. There's no real way to reverse the decline of the United States. In terms of slowing it down, I don't know how, because the United States' fate is really outside their hands at this point. It entirely comes up to, are the other countries going to use the US dollar as a global reserve and trade currency? And so slowing it down is entirely dependent on if countries hold on to that US dollar for longer. And I don't think that's going to happen. And so hopefully that answers your questions here. So thank you for sticking with me, and see you next time.